So I feel so proud and so excited to be helping to break the cycle of dysfunction in my own family, to stop the cycle of substance use disorders, of addiction, and recognize it's the sadness that has been the reality in my family, but then feel so proud that I'm part of that change because I've put in the work for education to understand what happened in my family exactly, how I was affected, and the therapy, self care, education, everything that I've done to work on myself and in healing and in feeling better, having a life I truly love. That has only been possible because of the time and age that we are living in today. That coupled with the fact that I happen to have a grandmother and some other people in my life who helped inspire me to focus on personal growth and healing. And it was the combination of those resources and a few people who were helpful in my journey that I've been able to stop this passing of dysfunction in my family.